Congratulations, you've just been born into nature's most demanding daycare system. Your first challenge? Your parents have just walked away, leaving you in a vast nursery with dozens to hundreds of other helpless chicks while they march across miles of ice to find food. Welcome to penguin crèches, massive communities where no adults watch every move and where survival depends entirely on your ability to stay warm, avoid predators, and compete for resources. Before you settle in, tap subscribe if these gentle animal tales help you unwind. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop a note in the comments and say hello. Now, lower the lights, maybe start a little background noise to keep things cozy, and let's drift into tonight's story. We'll explore how the very first days of tiny hatchling set the stage for everything to come. Picture the soft tapping from inside an egg, balanced precariously on a parent's feet in complete Antarctic darkness. You're listening to the sound of a penguin chick using its egg tooth, a tiny temporary spike on its beak, to break through a shell that's been its entire world for roughly 2 months. About 64 to 66 days. This isn't the gentle pecking you might imagine from watching farm chickens hatch. This is an exhausting life or death struggle that can take up to 3 days of continuous effort. The chick inside has been growing while the air outside can plunge well below freezing, sometimes near -40 degrees. And the egg depends on the parent's brood pouch and the thick shell for warmth. This dramatic balancing act on the parent's feet is specific to emperor and king penguins, who have evolved this remarkable incubation method for survival in the harshest conditions on Earth. The moment our chick begins this process, called pipping, it faces its first brutal reality check. Unlike baby robins or sparrows who hatch into cozy nests lined with soft materials and warmed by spring sunshine, penguin chicks emerge directly into one of Earth's most hostile environments. There's no gradual introduction to the world, no gentle transition period. The Antarctic wind howls at speeds that can reach over 100 miles per hour, and the ground beneath the parent's feet is solid ice that never melts. When that shell finally cracks open, the contrast is extreme, and newly hatched chicks can quickly lose heat if left exposed to the frigid air. Now breathe with me for a moment and consider what this tiny creature faces in its very first seconds of life. The parent penguin has been fasting for months during incubation, living entirely off stored body fat while maintaining the precise balance needed to keep the egg from freezing or overheating. The incubating adult can lose a large portion of its body weight during this period, sometimes up to 40%, so every feeding and warmth transfer matters. This parent is already operating on dangerously low energy reserves, and every day spent caring for a newly hatched chick brings them closer to starvation. The chick doesn't know this yet, but it's been born into a situation where parental care comes with an expiration date measured in days, not weeks or months like other birds. The newly hatched chick weighs less than 3 ounces, about the same as a standard candy bar, and arrives in the world facing immediate challenges. While chicks of other bird species might spend leisurely weeks in the nest being fed by attentive parents, penguin chicks have limited energy reserves that must fuel not just growth, but immediate learning. They need to master several critical skills almost instantly: maintaining their own body temperature when separated from the parent's brood pouch, recognizing their parent's unique call among thousands of similar voices, and most importantly, begging for food with enough persistence and intensity to convince a starving parent to share their precious energy reserves. The parent penguin, meanwhile, performs a delicate balancing act that would challenge the most skilled circus performer. They must keep the chick warm against their own body while still being able to move around the colony, protect their offspring from aggressive neighbors and predators, and begin the gradual process of encouraging independence. But here's what makes this situation particularly harsh. The parent is already planning their departure. They know, through years of evolved instinct, that staying too long means death for both parent and chick. Leaving too early means death for the chick alone. The math is brutal and precise. During these first critical days, the chick must also learn to beg effectively for food through a specific set of behaviors that trigger the parent's feeding response. This isn't cute baby bird chirping. It's an aggressive, desperate performance where the chick literally forces its head into the parent's throat to access regurgitated fish and krill. The feeding process looks violent and uncomfortable, and that's because it essentially is. The chick that begs most persistently and aggressively gets fed. The quieter, more passive chicks often don't receive enough nutrition to survive their first week. What makes this even more challenging is that penguin chicks are born with a remarkably small window for error. They must double their body weight within their first few weeks while simultaneously developing the behavioral skills they'll need to survive in a crèche, a massive nursery where hundreds of chicks cluster together without adult supervision. There's no gradual introduction to social dynamics, no practice runs. The skills they develop during these first days with their parents are the only preparation they'll get for the community survival challenge that's coming. Temperature regulation becomes a constant battle from the moment they hatch. The chick's initial down is fluffy but not waterproof, and it provides limited insulation compared to adult penguin feathers. They must learn to position themselves correctly against their parent's body, finding the sweet spot where they can absorb maximum warmth without blocking the parent's movement or feeding. When the parent shifts position or briefly steps away, the chick experiences immediate cold shock that can be fatal if it lasts too long. Perhaps most remarkably, this entire brutal introduction to life serves an important evolutionary purpose. The chicks who survived these first chaotic days have already demonstrated the physical resilience, behavioral adaptability, and competitive instincts they'll need to thrive in even harsher conditions ahead. Nature isn't being needlessly cruel. It's running an intensive screening process where only the most capable individuals advance to the next level of challenges. As our newly hatched chick grows stronger and more demanding during its first week of life, both parent and offspring are preparing for a separation that will test everything the chick has learned. The parent's internal countdown continues its relentless pace, and soon they'll face an impossible choice that will change everything for this small, vulnerable creature who has only just learned to recognize their voice. The departure happens with calculated precision that would seem heartless if we didn't understand the evolutionary mathematics behind it. Imagine watching your only protectors turn their backs and waddle away across endless ice, leaving you in a crowd of strangers who look exactly like you but offer no comfort, no warmth, and no promise of food. You're barely 3 weeks old, still covered in fluffy grey down that provides minimal insulation against Antarctic winds, and the two giant black and white figures who represented safety and sustenance in your entire world are now just distant dots moving steadily toward the horizon. This moment marks the beginning of your real education in survival, though you don't understand that yet. All you know is that the steady warmth of your parents' brood pouch, the reliable rhythm of feeding times, and the protective shadow of their body are suddenly completely gone. The parent penguin faces a calculation that would break any human heart, but represents millions of years of evolutionary wisdom. Stay with the chick and watch both of you slowly starve as the parent's body fat reserves continue to dwindle. Leave now, while the parent still has enough energy to make the grueling journey to feeding grounds, and the chick has at least some chance of surviving until the adult returns with food. The mathematics are brutal and precise. In extreme cases, such as emperor penguins during winter incubation, adults can lose up to 40% of their body weight during the incubation and early chick rearing period. Once they drop below a certain threshold, they lack the strength to complete the round-trip journey to open water where fish and krill are abundant. This departure isn't random or cruel. The parent communicates their intentions through specific behaviors that serve as preparation. They gradually spend less time warming the chick, encouraging it to develop better temperature regulation skills. The feeding schedule becomes less frequent, pushing the chick to vocalize more persistently. Most importantly, parents use distinctive calls and consistent vocal patterns to help chicks recognize them at reunion, establishing the unique acoustic signature the chick must remember during the weeks of separation ahead. The night before departure, the parent performs a final intensive feeding session, transferring as much nutrition as possible to give the chick maximum energy reserves for the challenging weeks ahead. This last meal often represents a significant portion of the parent's remaining body weight, a final investment in their offspring's survival chances. The chick, unaware of what's coming, simply experiences this as an unusually generous feeding session. By morning, that same parent will be gone, having slipped away while the chick sleeps, joining dozens of other adults, forming long, single-file lines, marching toward distant water. The journey these departing parents undertake would challenge even the most experienced human explorers. Depending on species and ice conditions, adults may travel tens to hundreds of miles to reach feeding grounds. Some journeys can cover hundreds of miles across shifting ice, through blizzards that can last for days, navigating by instinct and celestial cues to reach areas where they can finally dive and hunt. The entire round trip can take anywhere from 2 weeks to over a month, depending on ice conditions and food availability. During this time, they face their own survival challenges, avoiding predators, conserving energy, and timing their return journey to ensure they still have food in their stomachs when they reach the colony. When adults return, they face a nearly impossible acoustic and visual task of locating their specific chick among hundreds of nearly identical young birds. Meanwhile, the temporarily left chick faces an immediate crisis that tests every survival skill it has developed during its brief life. Without parental warmth, it must quickly locate other chicks and join the massive huddles that form spontaneously throughout the colony. These aren't organized nurseries with adult supervision. They're chaotic clusters of equally desperate young birds, each trying to position themselves in the warmest spots while avoiding being trampled or pushed to the deadly edges where exposure can kill within hours. The chick must also learn to recognize and respond to danger calls from other chicks, as predators quickly discover that these undefended nurseries represent easy hunting opportunities. Skuas circle overhead, looking for stragglers or chicks separated from the main groups. Giant petrels patrol the edges of colonies, capable of snatching chicks that wander too far from the protective masses of their peers. Even other adult penguins returning to feed their own offspring can accidentally trample smaller chicks during the chaos of reunion and feeding. Perhaps most challenging of all, the temporarily left chick must somehow maintain its vocal abilities and recognition skills so it can identify its parents' unique call when they eventually return. Weeks of separation, constant noise from hundreds of other chicks, and the stress of survival can degrade these crucial acoustic memories. Chicks that lose the ability to recognize their parents' calls face starvation even when the adults return laden with food, because they won't be able to navigate through the crowd to reach their own family members. The brutal reality is that many chicks don't survive this separation period. Some succumb to exposure when they can't maintain position in the warming huddles. Others fall victim to predators or get trampled during feeding frenzies when parents return to the colony. Still others simply run out of energy reserves before their parents' complete foraging journey. The colony grounds become littered with small grey bodies that represent the casualties of this harsh system. Yet this apparent cruelty serves a crucial evolutionary purpose. The chicks who do survive this forced independence have already demonstrated the physical resilience, social intelligence, and competitive instincts they'll need to thrive as adults in one of Earth's most challenging environments. They've learned to huddle effectively for warmth, to recognize and avoid danger, to compete successfully for position and resources, and to maintain their identity and family connections even under extreme stress. The parents' departure transforms helpless dependent chicks into members of a desperate community where cooperation and competition intertwine in complex ways. They must now learn the delicate balance between working together for mutual warmth and protection while still fighting for the best positions and resources. This transition from individual parental care to group survival represents their first real lesson in the social dynamics that will define their adult lives. The massive gathering they're about to join operates by its own harsh rules, where hundreds of fluffy bodies cluster together in a constantly shifting mass of survival instinct. These gatherings form what scientists call crèches, but don't let that formal term fool you into thinking this is some organized daycare system. Picture yourself as one of these newly abandoned chicks, weighing less than a pound and covered in down that provides minimal protection against winds that can freeze exposed skin in minutes. Your first instinct is to seek warmth, And you're not alone in this need. Dozens, then hundreds of other chicks are doing exactly the same thing, all pressing together in tight formations that from above look like massive grey carpets spread across the white Antarctic landscape. The dynamics of crèche formation follow a predictable but harsh pattern. Larger, more aggressive chicks naturally gravitate toward the center of these huddles, where body heat from all directions creates the warmest microenvironment. The center can be markedly warmer than the edges, often enough to make the difference between survival and death when ambient temperatures drop below -30 degrees Fahrenheit. The smaller, weaker chicks find themselves gradually pushed toward the periphery, where exposure to wind and cold creates a deadly countdown timer that measures their remaining life in hours rather than days. Now, breathe with me and consider the constant movement happening within these huddles. Feel the weight of the mass, the tiny warmth pooling in the center as hundreds of chicks engage in a natural rotation, where individuals slowly move inward and outward. This isn't a static arrangement where chicks find a spot and stay there. Those on the outside gradually work their way toward the warming center, while those in the interior eventually get pushed outward, creating a circular flow that ensures most individuals get some access to favorable positions. The hierarchy that emerges within these crèches is both fascinating and unforgiving. Size matters, but so does persistence and social awareness. Chicks that learn to push assertively, without expending too much energy, tend to maintain better positions than those who either give up too easily or exhaust themselves fighting constantly. The most successful individuals develop a kind of quiet intelligence, reading the movement patterns of the group and positioning themselves to take advantage of shifts in the huddle structure. The edges of these gatherings become zones of particular danger. Chicks pushed to the outer rim face immediate exposure to Antarctic conditions that can kill within hours. Their down becomes matted with ice crystals, their body temperature drops rapidly, and their energy reserves deplete as they struggle to generate enough heat to survive. Some manage to push back into the warming center, but others lack the strength or social skills to fight their way back to safety. The constant jostling creates its own set of hazards. Smaller chicks can be trampled during particularly aggressive repositioning phases, especially when the entire huddle suddenly shifts direction in response to wind changes or perceived threats. The sound of hundreds of chicks vocalizing simultaneously creates a cacophony that masks individual distress calls, making it difficult for chicks in trouble to communicate their need for help or better positioning. What makes this system particularly challenging is that cooperation and competition happen simultaneously. Chicks benefit from the group warmth that only large huddles can provide, but they must also compete with every other individual for access to the warmest spots. Cooperation exists largely because it benefits each individual, not because of altruism. Every chick makes decisions based entirely on their own immediate survival needs, though their collective actions create the warming effect that keeps the group alive. The physical demands of constant repositioning take their own toll on chick energy reserves. Fighting for position, climbing over other birds, and maintaining balance in a constantly shifting mass all require calories that chicks don't have to spare. Some individuals exhaust themselves in futile attempts to reach better positions, leaving them too weak to continue competing effectively. Temperature gradients within a single huddle can vary dramatically. The very center might be a relatively comfortable 20 degrees above zero, while the outer edges experience the full brutality of Antarctic weather. Chicks learn to read these thermal zones instinctively, developing an almost magnetic attraction to warmer areas and an urgent need to escape the deadly cold zones. Perhaps most remarkably, this apparently chaotic system actually teaches essential life skills that chicks will need as adults. They learn to read social dynamics, to compete effectively without wasting energy, to recognize thermal opportunities, and to balance cooperation with self-interest. The social intelligence required to navigate these complex group dynamics prepares them for adult colony life, where similar skills determine access to mates, nesting sites, and feeding opportunities. The brutal efficiency of this system becomes clear when you realize that the chicks who thrive in these crèches have already demonstrated the combination of physical resilience, social awareness, and competitive instincts that define successful adult penguins. they've learned to survive in groups while maintaining their individual identity and needs. They've developed the thick skin, both literally and figuratively, that life in Antarctica demands. But even as these chicks master the complex dynamics of huddle survival, they remain completely vulnerable to threats that see these massive gatherings not as communities of mutual support, but as convenient hunting grounds. The very behavior that keeps them warm, clustering together in large, dense groups, also makes them visible from great distances to predators that patrol both the skies above and the ice below, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A patient hunter overhead begins its calculated approach, wings spread wide against the pale Antarctic sky. You're witnessing one of nature's most efficient hunting strategies, where predators have learned that penguin colonies represent abundant feeding opportunities with minimal risk and maximum reward. Antarctic skuas and giant petrels are known to prey on eggs and chicks at colonies, often timing attacks when defenses are weakest. These birds of prey don't hunt randomly or opportunistically. They time their presence precisely to coincide with the most vulnerable periods in the penguin breeding cycle, when thousands of defenseless chicks gather in massive crèches without any adult supervision or protection. Picture yourself as one of these grey, fluffy chicks, huddled with hundreds of others for warmth, when suddenly the collective murmur of your companion shifts to alarm calls. Overhead, a brown skua glides silently on 4-foot wings, scanning the crowd below with eyes that can spot individual movement from remarkable distances. These aerial predators possess hunting skills refined over millions of years, specifically for exploiting penguin colonies. They understand the social dynamics of crèches, recognizing that chicks on the edges of huddles are already stressed, weakened, and separated from the protective center of the group. Skuas sometimes work in pairs. One distracts while the other seizes an opportunity, demonstrating coordinated tactics that increase their hunting success. The attack unfolds with surgical precision that would impress any military strategist. Skuas don't simply dive randomly into crowds of chicks. They orbit the colony, studying movement patterns, identifying the weakest individuals, and waiting for the perfect moment when a chick becomes isolated from the main group. The strike happens faster than most observers can follow. One moment a chick is struggling to maintain position on the edge of a huddle, the next it's being carried away in powerful talons. Often before the surrounding chicks even realize what happened, giant petrels bring their own specialized hunting techniques to penguin colonies, operating more like ground-based stalkers than aerial assassins. These massive seabirds, with wingspans approaching 10 feet, patrol the periphery of colonies with the patient methodology of experienced hunters. They walk deliberately through areas where chicks have been trampled or weakened, dispatching struggling individuals with efficiency that demonstrates their intimate knowledge of penguin vulnerability patterns. Unlike skuas, giant petrels often feed on sight, creating scenes that can disturb entire sections of crèches as chicks witness the fate awaiting those who fall behind in the survival competition. Ground-based threats add another layer of danger to the already precarious existence of crèche life. Antarctic fur seals, despite being marine mammals primarily adapted for ocean hunting, occasionally patrol the edges of penguin colonies during their own breeding seasons. These powerful predators can move surprisingly quickly across ice and rocky terrain, snatching chicks that wander too far from the protective masses of their peers. Hunting style differs markedly from aerial predators, involving sudden lunges and ambushes that rely on the element of surprise rather than sustained pursuit. Now breathe with me and consider what happens when these attacks trigger panic responses throughout the crèches. A single skua strike can cause hundreds of chicks to scatter in all directions, creating immediate chaos that often proves more deadly than the original predator threat. Smaller chicks get trampled underfoot as larger ones flee in panic, while the carefully maintained huddle structures that provide essential warmth collapse instantly, leaving previously protected individuals exposed to both predators and lethal temperature drops. The aftermath reveals harsh mathematics. Chicks who panic and run blindly often separate themselves from any chance of rejoining protective huddles. while those who freeze in place may avoid immediate predation, but can succumb to exposure if they remain immobile too long in sub-zero conditions. What makes this predation pressure particularly challenging is that chicks possess virtually no defense mechanisms beyond grouping behavior. They cannot fly, they move awkwardly on land, they have no natural weapons or aggressive capabilities, and their only camouflage is the slight protection offered by gathering with others who look identical. When predators attack, the chick's options are limited to running, hiding within crowds, or hoping that someone else becomes the target instead. The constant predator presence shapes chick behavior in subtle but important ways. Young penguins in heavily predated colonies develop heightened vigilance and faster reflexes compared to those in safer environments. They learn to recognize danger signals from their companions and respond appropriately to different types of threats. This predation pressure selects for chicks with faster reflexes and heightened vigilance, creating an early training system in threat assessment and rapid decision-making that proves invaluable for their adult lives, when similar predator pressures will continue throughout their lifespans. Interestingly, the constant predation pressure serves an important evolutionary function beyond simple population control. Chicks who survive repeated predator encounters have demonstrated the alertness, quick reflexes, and decision-making abilities that characterize successful adult penguins. They've learned to balance group cooperation with individual survival instincts, developing the complex social awareness needed to thrive in colony environments where thousands of individuals compete for resources and safety. The timing of predator attacks often correlates with weather patterns and colony dynamics that experienced hunters understand intuitively. Storm systems that break up huddle formations create feeding opportunities for aerial predators. Periods when returning parents create disturbances in crèche structures provide openings for ground-based hunters. The most successful predators learn to read these environmental cues and position themselves accordingly. As weeks pass and surviving chicks grow larger and more experienced, predator success rates gradually decline. Stronger, more alert chicks become increasingly difficult targets, while the constant attrition removes the weakest individuals from the population. This natural selection process, brutal as it appears, ensures that only the most capable chicks advance to the next challenges in their development. The survivors of this predator gauntlet face their next major test when adult penguins begin returning from their foraging expeditions, carrying food but facing an almost impossible task: locating their own offspring among thousands of nearly identical chicks scattered across the colony grounds. The returning adult begins calling across the vast expanse, voice cutting through layers of colony noise as it searches for one specific response among thousands. Among all these nearly identical black and white bodies, this parent must somehow locate their own chick before it starves, navigating what amounts to the world's most challenging recognition test. Picture yourself as that returning penguin, having just completed a grueling 3-week journey across shifting ice to reach feeding grounds where you dove repeatedly into frigid waters, competing with seals and other penguins for fish and krill. Your stomach bulges with partially digested food that represents your chick's only chance of survival. But now you face a sensory maze that would challenge the most sophisticated recognition systems humans have ever developed. The colony stretches before you like a living carpet of movement and sound. It contains upwards of 10,000 individuals in various stages of their breeding cycles. Adults waddle purposefully between different areas, returning from foraging trips or heading out to sea. Chicks cluster in massive crèches that shift and flow like gray clouds across the ice. The visual similarity between individuals creates an almost overwhelming sameness that makes picking out your own offspring seem impossible. Every adult paint the other distractions, and then shape and fat can end escalate. Every chick appears as a fluffy gray ball with dark eyes and a demanding beak. Now, breed with me and listen to the acoustic environment these returning parents must navigate. The colony produces a constant, layered chorus that can overwhelm the senses. thousands of voices call simultaneously. They create overlapping layers of communication that include territorial disputes between adults, begging calls from hungry chicks, alarm signals warning of predator threats, and most importantly for our returning parent, the recognition calls that families use to locate each other across impossible distances and crowds. The vocal recognition system that penguins have evolved represents one of nature's most sophisticated acoustic achievements. Parents and chicks use unique vocal signatures to recognize one another in large colonies. Each adult penguin possesses a unique call signature that functions like a vocal fingerprint. It contains specific frequency patterns, rhythmic structures, and harmonic qualities that remain consistent across time and circumstances. These signatures develop during the early bonding period between parents and chicks. They become encoded in both individuals' acoustic memory systems through repeated exposure and reinforcement. Your chick, meanwhile, has been practicing its own recognition abilities throughout the weeks of separation. Despite the chaos of crèche life, the constant pressure from predators, and the energy demands of simply staying alive, it has maintained the acoustic memory patterns. These allow it to distinguish its parent's unique call from the thousands of similar voices in the colony. This auditory learning happens without any formal teaching or practice sessions. The chick's brain automatically filters and categorizes the sound environment. It builds recognition templates that can identify familiar voices even under challenging acoustic conditions. The reunion process begins when returning parents start broadcasting their recognition calls from the edges of the colony. These aren't casual vocalizations, but intensive acoustic signals that carry across remarkable distances. They cut through the background noise of colony life. The parent stands tall, points its beak skyward, and produces a series of complex calls. These announce its return and identity to any listening offspring. This calling behavior can continue for hours as the parent gradually works its way toward the areas where chicks typically gather. You call and listen. Call and listen, scanning the crowd for movement that signals recognition. Successful recognition requires active participation from both parent and chick. When a chick hears what might be its parent's call, it must respond with its own recognition signal. It must begin moving purposefully toward the sound source. This navigation challenge involves pushing through dense crowds of other families. It means avoiding aggressive adults protecting their own reunions. It requires maintaining acoustic contact across constantly changing distances and sound conditions. Chicks who fail to respond quickly enough or move in the wrong direction often lose the opportunity entirely. The heartbreaking scenarios unfold when this sophisticated system breaks down under the pressure of colony chaos and time constraints. Some chicks, weakened by weeks of survival stress, lack the energy to respond appropriately to their parents' calls. They cannot move effectively through the crowds. Others have suffered acoustic damage from prolonged exposure to extreme noise levels. This reduces their ability to distinguish between similar-sounding voices. Sometimes noise, stress, or weakness means some chicks don't respond, and reunions fail. Parents sometimes return with damaged vocal abilities after weeks of harsh conditions at sea. This makes their calls less recognizable to offspring, who memorized earlier versions of the same signatures. Watch how desperate chicks begin following any adult whose calls seem remotely familiar. They create scenes of mistaken identity that can prove fatal for both individuals involved. Adult penguins typically reject foreign chicks aggressively, sometimes violently. This wastes precious time and energy while their own offspring searches elsewhere in the colony. Meanwhile, the clock continues ticking as the parents' food reserves begin deteriorating from exposure to stomach acids and environmental conditions. The race against time intensifies with each passing hour after the parents' return. The parents' stored food must still be fed soon. Delays reduce its nutritional value, so reunions are urgent. Parents who take too long to locate their offspring may find themselves with food that no longer provides adequate nutrition for successful chick development. This biological timer adds urgency to every recognition attempt and movement through the colony. Temperature conditions compound the challenge. Returning parents must balance search activities with their own thermoregulation needs. Extended periods of calling and movement in harsh Antarctic weather drain additional energy reserves that these adults can't afford to lose. The longer the search continues, the less prepared the parent becomes for the next foraging trip that will be required within days of this reunion. Yet somehow, against these overwhelming odds, most penguin families manage successful reunions that demonstrate the remarkable precision of their acoustic abilities. The moment of recognition creates an immediate behavioral change in both individuals. Parent and chick move directly toward each other through crowds that seemed impossible to navigate just moments before. But the relief of successful recognition quickly gives way to an entirely different kind of intensity as the long-awaited feeding process begins with surprising aggression and desperation. The chick launches into an urgent feeding display that transforms the gentle reunion into something far more intense. You're witnessing one of nature's most demanding feeding behaviors, where the familiar image of parent birds delicately placing food into waiting beaks gets replaced by what resembles a determined wrestling match. The moment parent and chick recognize each other, the chick immediately transforms from a patient searcher into a persistent beggar who will stop at nothing to access the precious food stored in its parent's crop. Picture yourself watching this feeding process unfold. The parent penguin, exhausted from weeks of travel and hunting, stands relatively still while their chick launches into an intense feeding display that would alarm anyone unfamiliar with penguin behavior. The chick approaches from the side, opens its beak wide, and begins what can only be described as an assault on the parent's throat area. It pushes its entire head deep into the parent's esophagus, sometimes disappearing up to its shoulders, using its beak and tongue to stimulate the regurgitation reflex that will bring up partially digested fish and krill. The mechanics of this feeding process reveal just how specialized penguins have become for surviving in environments where food is scarce and feeding opportunities are precious. The parent's crop, an enlarged section of the esophagus, serves as a storage compartment where fish and krill can be held for extended periods during the journey back to the colony. When the chick triggers the feeding response through its determined throat stimulation, powerful muscular contractions force this stored food back up through the parent's digestive system and into the chick's waiting mouth. Now breathe with me and consider what makes this feeding system particularly challenging and competitive. Returning parents don't just attract their own offspring during these feeding sessions. The sight and sound of successful feeding draws hungry chicks from throughout the surrounding area, creating chaotic situations where multiple young birds compete simultaneously for access to the same food source. The parent must somehow feed their own chick while physically defending against interlopers who are equally desperate for nutrition. The competition becomes fierce as non-related chicks attempt to muscle in on feeding sessions they haven't earned through weeks of separation and survival. These hungry interlopers employ the same determined throat diving techniques as the rightful offspring, creating confusing melees where parents struggle to distinguish their own chick from equally persistent competitors. The parent penguin finds itself in the awkward position of trying to satisfy their own offspring while using their flippers and body weight to push away determined strangers. Watch how quickly feeding hierarchies establish themselves during these chaotic sessions. Larger, stronger chicks often dominate feeding frenzies, translating early size advantages into ongoing nutritional benefits that compound over time. Size advantages that developed during the crèche survival period now translate directly into feeding success. The biggest chicks get more food, grow faster, and become even more effective competitors in subsequent feeding sessions, reinforcing the patterns established during their earliest survival challenges. The urgency driving these feeding behaviors stems from the limited window of opportunity each session represents. The partially digested food in the parent's crop continues breaking down from digestive enzymes, making delays costly for chicks who have already survived weeks of near-starvation conditions. Every minute of delay or interruption reduces the nutritional value of the meal that may need to sustain the chick for days or weeks until the next feeding opportunity. Parents returning with food often attract crowds of hungry chicks that create feeding situations resembling chaotic bargain sales more than family meals. The successful parent finds themselves surrounded by dozens of begging young birds all employing the same determined feeding behaviors that their own offspring uses. The acoustic environment becomes overwhelming as multiple chicks vocalize their demands simultaneously, creating a cacophony that makes parent-offspring recognition even more challenging than it was during the initial reunion phase. And then, after the rush, a quiet exhaustion settles over the parent and chick. The physical demands of these feeding sessions take their toll on both participants. Parents must maintain balance and composure, while hungry chicks literally climb on them, push deep into their throats, and compete persistently for position and access. Sessions may last tens of minutes as chicks work to extract every possible morsel from their parent's crop, leaving both individuals drained by the intensity of the interaction. Inadequate feeding during these crucial sessions can doom a chick, even if it has successfully survived all the previous challenges of crèche life, predator attacks, and family reunion. Chicks who fail to feed adequately due to competition from stronger individuals, recognition failures, or timing issues may lack the energy reserves needed for the rapid growth phase that must occur before the brief Antarctic summer ends. The harsh mathematics of survival mean that falling behind in nutrition often equals death within weeks. The intense feeding behaviors that emerge during these sessions serve an important developmental purpose beyond simple nutrition transfer. Chicks learn to compete effectively for limited resources, developing the persistence and physical assertiveness they'll need throughout their adult lives. The penguin who can most successfully extract food from reluctant parents is often the same individual who will later excel at competing for mates, nesting sites, and feeding territories in the challenging adult social environment. Perhaps most remarkably, these urgent feeding sessions represent moments of deep evolutionary bonding between parent and offspring. The parent's willingness to regurgitate precious food resources demonstrates an investment in the chick's survival that comes at significant personal cost. The chick's determined feeding behavior, while appearing selfish, it actually represents sophisticated recognition and bonding mechanisms that ensure the right individuals benefit from parental sacrifice. The aftermath of successful feeding sessions reveals the next critical challenge facing these young survivors. Those who manage to secure adequate nutrition now face an even more daunting task: a biological countdown that will determine whether they live or die before winter arrives. The chicks now face their most demanding transformation, as they must rapidly gain the bulk and waterproof plumage needed for life at sea within the short Antarctic summer. You're watching nature's most intense growth sprint, where penguin chicks face development deadlines that would challenge any living creature on Earth. While most baby birds enjoy leisurely childhoods with extended parental care and gradual skill development, penguin chicks operate under time constraints that make their entire juvenile period feel like a frantic preparation for final exams that determine life or death. Picture yourself as one of these rapidly growing chicks, having survived the crèche experience, predator attacks, and competitive feeding sessions, only to discover that your next challenge involves completely rebuilding your body in record time. The fluffy grey down that kept you warm during your early weeks now becomes a liability that must be entirely replaced with sleek, waterproof feathers designed for underwater hunting. This transformation happens through what scientists call the catastrophic molt, during which they cannot swim for several weeks while replacing all their feathers simultaneously. Your entire feather coat falls out and regrows at once, leaving you temporarily naked and vulnerable in one of Earth's harshest climates. The energy demands of this rapid transformation boggle the mind when you consider the mathematics involved. Every calorie becomes precious currency that gets allocated between maintaining body temperature, building muscle mass, developing bone density, growing new feathers, and practicing essential survival skills. There's no margin for error in this biological budget, as chicks must fuel massive daily growth while simultaneously preparing for complete independence from parental care. Now, breathe with me and consider what this accelerated development looks like from the outside. Chicks enter an awkward adolescent phase where their bodies seem caught between two worlds, too big for their current coordination, but too small for independent survival. The physical transformation creates its own set of vulnerabilities that predators quickly learn to exploit. During the molting phase, when old feathers fall out before new ones fully develop, chicks experience periods where their insulation drops dramatically. They become walking examples of poor thermal regulation, burning extra calories just to maintain core body temperature while simultaneously trying to fuel rapid growth. The energy equation becomes increasingly desperate as caloric needs peak precisely when the chick's ability to conserve energy reaches its lowest point. Parents face their own impossible calculations during this critical growth period. Each feeding trip becomes more expensive in terms of time and energy, as chicks demand larger meals to fuel their development. The adults must balance their offspring's increasing nutritional needs against their own survival requirements and the approaching deadline when they'll permanently abandon their young to fend for themselves. This creates a brutal feedback loop, where success breeds more demanding offspring who require greater parental investment at precisely the moment when parents have the least to give. The social dynamics of colonies change dramatically as chicks grow larger and more assertive in their feeding behaviors. Adolescent penguins begin practicing adult competition behaviors while still depending entirely on parental care for survival. They engage in mock territorial disputes, test their strength against similarly sized peers, and develop the aggressive instincts they'll need for adult life. These practice sessions often interfere with feeding schedules and family bonding, creating additional stress during an already challenging developmental period. Weather conditions add another layer of urgency to the growth deadline. Sudden Antarctic storms or premature sea ice breakup can make these tight developmental deadlines fatal, as environmental uncertainty shapes the urgency driving every aspect of chick development. Chicks who haven't reached adequate size and feather development when harsh weather strikes often lack the reserves needed to survive extended periods without food. The margin between successful development and starvation narrows with each passing day as the season progresses toward its inevitable end. The approaching abandonment deadline creates visible stress responses in both parents and chicks as family bonds begin shifting toward eventual separation. Parents start spending less time warming their offspring and more time encouraging independence through gradual withdrawal of care. Chicks respond with increasingly desperate begging behaviors, as if sensing that their window of guaranteed support is closing rapidly. These final weeks of family life involve constant negotiation between parental investment and offspring demands. Perhaps most remarkably, this compressed development timeline actually produces more resilient adults than slower growth processes might achieve. Chicks who successfully navigate the accelerated growth challenge have already demonstrated the metabolic efficiency, competitive instincts, and stress tolerance that define successful adult penguins. They've learned to maximize nutritional opportunities, compete effectively under pressure, and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. And this is where these bugs have usually secreted, and most popular ones. The rush childhood creates individuals uniquely equipped for the demanding adult environment they're about to enter. The physical changes happening during this growth sprint prepare chicks for survival challenges they haven't yet encountered, but will face within weeks. New waterproof feathers develop specialized structures that trap air for buoyancy while repelling water for insulation. Muscle development focuses on the specific groups needed for underwater propulsion and land navigation. Bone density increases to handle the pressure changes associated with deep diving. Every aspect of their physical development targets the requirements of their upcoming transition to aquatic independence. As chicks approach their final size and feather development, they begin exhibiting behaviors that signal readiness for the ultimate test of their development. They spend more time at the edges of colonies, looking toward the ocean with increasing interest rather than seeking warmth and protection from huddles. Their calls change from juvenile begging to exploratory vocalizations that sound increasingly like adult communication patterns. Those who successfully meet the deadline emerge with specialized waterproof feathers and improved diving efficiency, their bodies finally equipped for the transformation that awaits. The awkward adolescents who stumbled around colonies just weeks earlier now stand as sleek, capable swimmers ready to face their final graduation exam in the vast waters that stretch endlessly beyond the ice. The moment arrives when these newly capable swimmers must leave the safety of ice and enter waters that represent both opportunity and mortal danger. Picture yourself as one of these recently fledged penguins, standing at the edge of an ice shelf, where the solid white world you've known since hatching meets the dark, mysterious waters that will either become your new home or your final destination. Your fluffy grey down has been replaced by sleek black and white feathers that feel strange and unfamiliar against your skin. The waterproof coating that should protect you from the frigid Antarctic waters has never been tested, and you're about to stake your life on evolutionary engineering you've never had reason to trust. This first swim represents both graduation ceremony and final examination. Where months of accelerated development and survival training get compressed into a few critical minutes that will determine whether your brutal childhood adequately prepared you for adult life. Unlike most animals, who ease gradually into their adult environments, penguins face an immediate transition from terrestrial survival to aquatic mastery. There's no shallow end of the pool, no practice sessions with patient instructors, no safety nets or second chances. The moment you enter Antarctic waters, you become either predator or prey, with very little middle ground between success and death. The transformation from awkward land dweller to graceful underwater hunter happens without any adult guidance or supervision. Your parents completed their final feeding responsibilities weeks ago and have already departed for their own survival challenges, leaving you to figure out the mechanics of underwater propulsion, breath control, and navigation entirely through trial and error. The flippers that seemed clumsy and oversized during your terrestrial childhood must suddenly coordinate with precision that allows you to chase fish through three-dimensional underwater spaces while managing buoyancy, direction, and the urgent need for air. Now, breathe with me and consider the immediate challenges facing first-time swimmers who must master multiple life-threatening skills simultaneously. Holding your breath underwater requires techniques you've never practiced, as your lungs must adapt to pressure changes that increase dramatically with every foot of depth. Your eyes need time to adjust to underwater vision, where light behaves differently and distances become difficult to judge. Most critically, you must learn to catch fast-moving prey using hunting strategies that demand split-second timing and underwater agility that comes only through experience you haven't had time to acquire. The waters immediately offshore represent a high-risk stretch where experienced predators gather, using their intimate knowledge of penguin behavior to predict exactly where and when inexperienced swimmers will enter the water. Leered seals patrol coastal waters near colonies and are specialist predators of penguins, capable of accelerating from rest to over 25 miles per hour in seconds, streaking with precision that rarely allows escape opportunities for startled first-time swimmers. Orcas also hunt where fledglings venture out, operating in coordinated pods that can surround and isolate individual penguins before they realize they're being hunted. These intelligent marine mammals have learned to time their presence near colonies to coincide with peak fledging periods, when hundreds of inexperienced penguins enter the water within short time frames. Watch how the water near penguin colonies becomes a carefully orchestrated hunting zone, where multiple predator species coordinate their efforts to maximize success rates. Sea lions patrol the mid-water zones, intercepting penguins who manage to escape the immediate offshore dangers. Fur seals work the shallower areas where exhausted or injured penguins might seek refuge. Even smaller predators, like leopardfish and skates, position themselves to take advantage of the chaos and confusion created by larger hunters pursuing penguin prey. The transition period reveals harsh mathematics that eliminate many individuals who successfully survived every previous challenge their demanding childhood presented. For many species, mortality spikes sharply during the first marine months. Survival is uncertain, and losses can be large, with some species losing a majority of chicks in their first year. Many young penguins, who endured months of starvation, predator attacks, weather extremes, and competitive struggles, face their greatest test within hours of achieving what should represent their greatest success. The learning curve for underwater hunting skills proves particularly steep for penguins, who must immediately compete with experienced adults for the same prey resources. Young penguins lack the refined techniques that allow efficient energy expenditure during hunting dives. They waste precious oxygen and body heat on unsuccessful pursuit attempts, burning through their limited energy reserves much faster than adults who have perfected their underwater hunting strategies through years of practice. Temperature shock adds another layer of difficulty to first swimming experiences, as penguins encounter water temperatures that hover just above freezing, even during Antarctic summer months. Their newly developed waterproofing systems face immediate testing under conditions that can cause hypothermia within minutes if the feather structure fails or becomes compromised. The thermal regulation challenges become especially severe during longer diving sessions required for successful hunting. And yet many learn quickly, and the ocean becomes their element. Those penguins who do survive their initial ocean experiences demonstrate remarkable adaptability that transforms them almost overnight from vulnerable fledglings into competent marine predators. The individuals who master breath-holding techniques develop effective hunting strategies and learn to avoid predator encounters while securing adequate nutrition. Join an elite group equipped with skills that will serve them throughout their adult lives in some of Earth's most challenging marine environments. The successful first swimmers develop an intimate understanding of ocean currents, prey behavior, and predator avoidance that represents graduation from nature's most demanding survival curriculum. They've learned to read underwater environments, manage their energy efficiently, and balance the constant risks of marine hunting against the nutritional rewards that sustain life in Antarctic waters. Fledglings who survive rapidly develop improved hunting skills, breath control, and predator avoidance, transforming from awkward beginners into capable ocean hunters within weeks of their first tentative dives. These newly minted ocean survivors have mastered what seems like the ultimate challenge, achieving the aquatic expertise that defines adult penguin life. But even these accomplished swimmers must face an annual trial that strips away every advantage they've worked so hard to develop, leaving them more vulnerable than they've been since their earliest days as helpless chicks. Once a year, every penguin faces a periodic, demanding renewal that temporarily strips them of their waterproof armor, transforming sleek ocean predators into vulnerable land-bound creatures who must survive on stored body fat alone. Picture yourself as an adult penguin who has spent months perfecting your underwater hunting skills, building up the physical conditioning needed for deep dives and long swimming sessions, only to face an annual biological process that removes every advantage you've worked to develop. The molting season arrives, with the inevitability of winter, triggered by hormonal changes that begin the systematic replacement of your most essential survival equipment. The catastrophic molt process unfolds as a complete feather replacement that takes several weeks to complete. Your waterproof feathers, which have kept you dry and warm during countless ocean expeditions, begin loosening at their roots and falling out in patches that leave your skin exposed to Antarctic winds. The specialized down layer that provides insulation against sub-zero temperatures disappears gradually, leaving you with increasingly poor thermal regulation, just as you lose access to the ocean waters that might provide some temperature relief. Your flight feathers, though penguins can't actually fly, serve crucial functions for underwater steering and propulsion, and these too begin shedding in ways that make even basic swimming impossible. Now, breathe with me and consider what this process looks like from the outside. Molting penguins resemble disheveled versions of their former selves, with patchy feather coverage that creates an almost comical appearance if you didn't understand the life-threatening vulnerability this represents. Their sleek, hydrodynamic profiles become lumpy and irregular as new feathers push through skin in random patterns, while old ones cling stubbornly to areas where the molt hasn't yet completed. The transformation takes several weeks, during which time these birds cannot enter water without risking hypothermia and drowning. The timing of molt creates particularly brutal survival mathematics, as penguins must accumulate enough body fat reserves to fuel both the energy-intensive feather replacement process and basic survival needs for the entire molting period. Adult penguins often gain substantial fat reserves beforehand, requiring intensive feeding periods that push their hunting skills and energy management to absolute limits. Those who enter molt without adequate reserves face starvation before the process completes, making pre-molt feeding success a matter of life and death. During the molting period, penguins cluster together in large groups that serve multiple survival functions while highlighting their desperate vulnerability. These molting aggregations don't possess the dynamic movement patterns of normal penguin colonies, where individuals can escape threats by diving into protective waters. Instead, molting birds huddle together in relatively static formations, where they share body heat and provide some mutual protection against predators, though their options for escape remain severely limited. The irony becomes apparent when you realize these are the same individuals who normally demonstrate remarkable agility and speed in marine environments. Predators are more likely to exploit molting birds, which cannot escape to sea when threatened. Skuas patrol molting colonies with increased frequency, knowing that penguins cannot reach their normal aquatic refuges. Fur seals and leopard seals occasionally venture onto land or ice edges where molting penguins gather, taking advantage of prey that cannot flee to water. Even smaller predators like giant petrels become significant threats to adults who would normally represent formidable opponents. The energy allocation during molt prioritizes feather production above almost all other biological functions, creating a race against time where penguins must complete their plumage replacement before their fat reserves become completely depleted. Each feather requires protein and energy investments, as individual feathers must be grown from scratch with the precise structural characteristics needed for waterproofing, insulation, and hydrodynamic efficiency. The penguin's metabolism shifts dramatically during this period, redirecting resources away from immune function, muscle maintenance, and other systems to focus on feather development. The social dynamics of molting colonies reveal interesting adaptations to this annual vulnerability period. Penguins that normally maintain territories and show aggressive behaviors toward neighbors become remarkably tolerant during molt, clustering together in ways that would trigger conflict under normal circumstances. This temporary social cooperation represents an evolved response to shared vulnerability, where mutual survival benefits outweigh normal competitive instincts. The colonies become quieter during molt, as even vocalizations require energy that molting birds cannot afford to waste. Weather conditions during molt can determine survival outcomes for entire groups of penguins, as storms or extended cold periods increase the energy costs of thermoregulation, precisely when birds have the least capacity to generate heat efficiently. Molting penguins caught in blizzards face particular challenges, as their incomplete feather coverage provides minimal protection against wind and precipitation, while their inability to seek shelter in water eliminates their primary escape strategy from harsh surface conditions. The gradual emergence of new plumage creates its own set of challenges, as partially molted penguins exist in a transitional state, where they possess neither the full protection of complete feather coverage nor the mobility advantages of their normal erratic lifestyle. New feathers require time to achieve full waterproofing capabilities through the distribution of oils produced by specialized glands, meaning that even penguins nearing molt completion cannot immediately return to normal swimming and diving activities. Perhaps most remarkably, this annual ordeal of complete vulnerability actually renews and strengthens the survival equipment that allows penguins to thrive in Antarctic marine environments. The new feathers that emerge from successful molts possess enhanced waterproofing, improved insulation properties, and better hydrodynamic characteristics than the worn plumage they replace. Penguins completing molt often demonstrate improved swimming efficiency and diving capabilities that reflect the superior quality of their renewed feather coats. Through months of watching these remarkable birds navigate impossible challenges, certain patterns begin to emerge that distinguish those who consistently survive from those who don't make it through each brutal test. What sets these individuals apart reveals itself through specific behavioral patterns that colony studies have documented among the most successful survivors. The secret isn't what you might expect from watching nature documentaries that focus on dramatic predator encounters or extreme weather survival. Success in penguin society doesn't belong to the biggest chicks or the most aggressive fighters. Instead, it comes down to mastering a surprisingly complex set of survival strategies that require intelligence, patience, and an instinctive sense of timing and risk that acts like a survival calculator. Picture yourself observing the penguins who consistently make it through each challenge while their neighbors fall victim to the same hazards. These survivors share certain behavioral patterns that become apparent only after watching colony dynamics unfold over entire seasons. They possess an uncanny ability to read situations before they become dangerous, positioning themselves advantageously while others react to threats after they've already materialized. The successful penguins seem to operate with an internal compass that guides them toward better outcomes in situations where split-second decisions determine survival. Timing represents perhaps the most crucial skill that separates survivors from casualties in penguin communities. The chicks who thrive learn to recognize the subtle environmental cues that predict feeding opportunities, weather changes, and predator presence. They notice when parent penguins begin exhibiting pre-departure behaviors, positioning themselves for final feeding sessions that other chicks miss entirely. During crèche formation, these individuals join huddles at optimal moments, avoiding the chaotic stampedes that often trample smaller participants while still securing access to warming positions. Now, take a quiet breath and picture the way these penguins choose where to stand. Decisions that look almost planned, down to the smallest step. They understand the geography of safety within colony structures, recognizing which areas offer the best combination of warmth, protection, and escape routes. During feeding frenzies, survivor penguins don't simply rush toward any available food source. Instead, they evaluate the competition levels around different feeding opportunities, often choosing less contested situations that provide adequate nutrition without the energy costs of intense fighting. The social intelligence displayed by successful penguins reveals itself through their remarkable ability to read group dynamics and individual behaviors within their communities. They recognize which adults are most likely to share food with non-related chicks during feeding sessions, positioning themselves near these generous individuals when their own parents are absent. They identify the strongest competitors in their age groups and avoid direct confrontations that would waste energy, instead finding ways to access resources through cooperation or by exploiting opportunities these dominant individuals overlook. Resource management separates successful penguins from those who burn through their limited energy reserves too quickly. The survivors develop an intuitive understanding of energy economics that guides every decision they make throughout their challenging childhood. They recognize when aggressive competition for marginal resources costs more energy than the potential benefits provide. During long periods without food, they master the art of conserving calories through strategic positioning and movement patterns that maintain warmth while minimizing energy expenditure. These successful individuals learn to predict predator behavior through careful observation of environmental patterns that less attentive chicks miss entirely. They notice how skua flight patterns change before attacks, how seal movements near ice edges indicate hunting intentions, and how other penguin alarm calls provide early warning systems for approaching threats. This predictive ability allows them to begin defensive responses before dangers become immediate, providing crucial extra seconds that often determine survival outcomes. Perhaps most remarkably, successful penguins master the delicate balance between individual survival needs and community cooperation requirements. They understand when joining group activities benefits their personal survival chances and when independent action serves them better. During crèche formation, they contribute to group warmth and protection while still advocating effectively for their own positioning needs. They recognize that certain survival challenges require cooperative responses, while others demand competitive behaviors. The social skills that matter most involve knowing when to cooperate, when to compete, and when to take calculated risks that might provide significant advantages. Survivor penguins learn to form temporary alliances during particularly challenging periods, sharing warmth and protection with other individuals who bring complementary strengths to survival situations. They also recognize when these cooperative relationships no longer serve their interests, transitioning smoothly back to competitive modes without damaging their ability to form future alliances. Watch how these successful individuals approach risk assessment with sophistication that rivals much more complex organisms. They evaluate potential rewards against probable costs in situations where incorrect calculations lead to death or serious injury. When deciding whether to join feeding competitions, explore new areas of the colony, or respond to alarm calls, they demonstrate decision-making processes that consistently produce favorable outcomes, even under extreme stress and uncertainty. The survivors teach a subtle lesson about patience and balance that emerges only through careful observation of their quiet strategies. They contribute to the survival of their communities while securing their own advancement through the various challenges of Antarctic life. They understand that some survival strategies work only when multiple individuals participate, making cooperation an essential element of personal success rather than a sacrifice of individual interests. These remarkable adaptations reveal themselves through hundreds of small decisions that compound into significant advantages over time. The individuals who master these complex survival strategies develop capabilities that serve them throughout their adult years, allowing them to thrive in conditions that would eliminate less adaptable species entirely. The harsh childhood experiences create adults uniquely equipped for the demanding environment they call home, where the same skills that ensured survival as chicks continue providing advantages throughout their lifespans. Through witnessing these survival strategies, we begin to understand how nature's most demanding challenges can forge extraordinary resilience in the creatures who face them. What emerges from these observations is a deeper understanding of how Antarctic conditions shape not just individual survival, but entire generations of penguins who carry these lessons forward. These chicks who master impossible challenges become the adults who will someday face the same difficult choices, continuing a cycle of quiet endurance that has sustained their species through millions of years of harsh polar winters. For emperor chicks, early year mortality can be extremely high, while other species face varying but significant risks during their vulnerable first months. Tonight, as you settle into warmth and safety, families are huddled together against the dark Antarctic wind. Their steady presence a testament to persistence in Earth's most demanding environments. Now, breathe and imagine the slow, steady hush of a colony under a pale polar sky. If you found this journey restful, you're welcome to subscribe for more calm animal stories.